Sambekar, and thanks Rachna Sen sir. It's a pleasure to share the experience of conservation with you all. It's interesting that conservation is getting recognized now, and my talk is structured in three parts. The first part is giving you, students, giving you slight academical background as what conservation means, what it includes, giving the definitions and things like that, which I think is very essential. The second part deals with what's happening to the city and how the practices are reacting to conservation. And the third part, which I wanted to either, if the time doesn't permit, I don't mind skipping it, is what we've done, trying to make a little change which is possible. So I'll start with this. This is what's happening to the city. There are a few buildings which are being conserved, which you can see the blue one popping up, and simultaneously the fabric is being eroded. You have these high-rise buildings which are coming up. Let's start with basic thing. What does conservation really mean? Conservation means any action that prolongs the life or the fabric of a fabric, and it arrests decay. That's the fundamental definition. Then what does it further include, or what does it aim is to retain the cultural significance? Now this word you will see very often used by conservationists because something which is worthy of merit has to be conserved. So that's the cultural significance. And the most important thing is that it should include security, maintenance and future. Normally what we see in our practice is these last three things are not there. One-time grant has come. So, all attempts are trying to do it in one way, but it doesn't last, it doesn't sustain. Second very interesting thing is conservation is cultural specific. The idea is that it's a concept which has originated from West. We are blindly imitating it without adapting and understanding it to our culture. The third thing which is very important is it's an art and science both. Science, when I mean, is because when you see it from a Western point of view of a kind of a product, when you see it, it's science when you talk of restoration in the technical definitions, analysis and other things, but it's an art. It's got to do with craftsmanship, it's got to do with process. That's the strength, that's the ethos of the whole movement. Lastly, I see this which not many people see because they always think conservation is against development, but I see this that it's a tool for sensitive development. And we have a very interesting scenario which you all know, but I'll just still tell you. We don't have this first lobby of architectural historians in our country, but a conservationist, if you may put it, treats the building sacrosanct and they want no change. Now, which is completely absurd. Change is inevitable, it's going to come. The builders see it as an this thing. They just see it as a major obstruction. And if you ever tell a builder that you have a heritage property, he'll, his antenna goes up. He wants to remove that property from the list, wants to demolish it, and wants a clean slate. He never uses that as an asset or a resource. The users of society by and large are ignorant, but now slowly people are getting concerned about it because when they see some tall high-rise development coming, and when their water supplies are less, now people are reacting. So they just started to wake up kind of a thing. The government is primarily unconcerned. Living heritage is not on the agenda at all. Although you have JNM, URM and other things, and they put the word as spice or kind of salad decoration, but it's really not in the mainstream. Ordinary architect just cares for his living bread and butter. He's doing what improves his practice, but he doesn't understand what the practice does to the environment. The conservation architect might be a bridge between the two extremes, the builders and the historians trying to do a middle path of least bad compromise, sensitive development. Now, it's very interesting. This left slide is a hilarious one picked up from Aga Khan magazine, wherein what was happening in Gulf in 1970s. 1970s, all buildings which were being constructed were all American buildings, tall, high-rise, and the old was considered to be inappropriate. The trend changed in 1980s, that got being copied indiscriminately, and you said, oh, sometimes of historical interest. But in 89, you had modern buildings being inappropriate and, borrowing contextual thing considered as progressive. And now sometimes you say, oh, well, it's sometimes of historical interest. So it's a very nice cartoon, and that's what I have titled, is conservation a fashion or a moment? That's a big debate because, anyway, this is not the forum to discuss it, but that's the present architectural scenario. Some elements being borrowed and put gives you kind of a good comprehensive thing. Some people justify it that better than the bland box type architecture which you are getting. So it's all contextual. Now, if I have to sum up Mumbai's built heritage, what would it be? It's important that heritage is seen from all this point of view. You can't see it in isolation. It has to be natural heritage first. It has to be archaeological sites. It has to be colonial architecture, domestic. This is what it covers: sacred, religious, public spaces, domestic. If you see it comprehensively, it makes sense. If you see it in isolation, then we are eroding the larger topic and issue. Now, when we are dealing with conservation, what does it include? So it includes something called maintenance. The idea is if you look after your building well, you really don't require the second step, which is preservation. If you do preservation, you don't require the third step, which is restoration. If you do restoration, you don't come to the fourth step, skillful repairs. And adaptive reuse is a phrase which has come from the West. But in our country, it's really not required, because in our cases, the buildings are misused, abused, disused, overused, but you rarely come across a vacant building which will be waiting to be adaptively reused. The last is, which is interesting, is it also includes reconstruction, historic infills, additions and extensions. And it's not necessarily we have to imitate, it can be very creative solutions. Now this is what, in a pictorial form, if I put all these things, and I've been fortunate to work at all these levels. One is at urban conservation, then area conservation, then building, and then material conservation. And it's all a subject in itself, and you can dwell on it in a great detail. Now, I've just split this thing. I'm dealing architectural conservation separate and urban conservation separate. Now, what are the principles in urban conservation? You have to control and regulate the rate of change. Now, this is the most important essential bit, which we tend to misunderstand. We are not denying that change is inevitable. Change is going to happen. But if you can control and regulate, that would really be good. Identify the cultural significance and to retain or augment the same. Incorporate present-day needs like services in an intelligent manner. To provide quality of life. Now, I would weight the quality of life more important than the historic fabric also. And the important thing would be sustainable, sensitive development, and to have a holistic, multidisciplinary understanding. Now, when we tackle the other aspect, which is architectural conservation, this is what is required. You become like a doctor and the historic building becomes a patient. You have to do minimum intervention. You have to retain the maximum of original fabric, use like-to-like material, and then we have this lovely definition, 6 inches, 6 yards, which very hilariously my wife jokes and says that you are like a darner. All you do is just rough the buildings and do that. So it's 6 inches and 6 yards. From 6 inches, you should not know what has been done, but from 6 inches, you should know what has been done, but from 6 yards, you should not know what's done. Then complete documentation of before and during and after work, and reversible intervention. And the last one is the most important, but we skip, because we all are so excited that we always want to experiment. Now, what are the difficulties in urban conservation? Everyone knows it, but I'll still, lack of government will, an ignorant and unconcerned public at large, completely ad hoc policies. We've lost the system of the word called planning. Everyone wants to take unilateral decision, do something, and they think they've managed it. Without an overall planning consideration, not tapping the historic fabric as a resource. Lack of funds due to Rent Control Act. Lack of incentives of retaining and repairing the fabric. Now, it's interesting that the incentives are more for reconstruction rather than for repairs and keeping it. And when you do reconstruction, you're burdening the infrastructure because car parking, FSI, everything increases. Different physical environments in the city. Now, unlike West, we have 3 different environments or strata all living together. One is planned, one is organic, and one is encroached. And it becomes a complex thing. It's not just one problem, it's multi-problems which needs to be tackled at different levels. The lack of strong legislation and implementation. We often criticize that we have everything on paper, but nothing works. The last is the most important, and which now will make conservation happen if it is to happen, is the increase in traffic, parking, and decrease the quality of life, and it comes to infrastructure and things, and decrease in the use of public transport.